So today we're going to talk about a subject which is very popular in the West and very popular amongst spiritual seekers. Amazing how popular it is. And that's nothing. Everybody loves nothing. So actually there was a little bit of sarcasm there. Nobody likes to talk about nothing. Everyone always likes to talk about something. But it's the most important thing in spirituality, nothing. So it's a big subject. Nothing is super important. But the thing is it's nothing, no thing. It doesn't exist. So it's kind of like we're talking about something that is completely non-existent. It's not a thing. You can't buy it in the shops. You can't buy it from the spiritual guru. There is no place where you can purchase nothing. We're ready. Nothing. So, so not many people like to speak about nothing because it's incredibly difficult to talk about something that does not exist. Some teachers do it incredibly well and it's really profound. But nothing is magic. Nothing is everything you ever looked for, but it just sounds so silly that it's nothing. What you've believed in the human world is that you're always looking for a thing. And what happens to people is we're always chasing things in life. We're always going around the mountain looking for things. Whether it be lovers or friendship or money or babies or home, whatever it might be, or not being stressed, trying to get out of stress, we are always looking for something that will complete us. And what's talked about in non-duality and also what's talked about in Buddhism is that actually everything you ever look for is right here, but your mistake is that you believe it's a thing. And you keep focusing on things. And there's something else that's happening here that's not a thing, but yet it's also everything. It's the source of this universe. It has to be no thing. If it was something, it would be a divided reality. It would mean that if it was a thing, it would mean that there was something that was a source of this universe. So if it was a human, it would mean that human is the creator of this universe. If it was a thing, an object, an energy, it would mean that would be the source of the universe, and we'd all try and capture it. We'd all get out our nets and try to capture whatever we thought the source was. So it has to be nothing. In order for it to be everything, it has to be no thing. And it's happening in your experience now. It's just that you look for things. So a good way for me to talk about this is to tell you an experience I had when I was visiting India in something like 2007, and I was in Thiru, and I've been going to lots of satsangs. I've been on the spiritual path for many years by that point, and I've been going to loads of satsang, and it was the afternoon and it was hot, and I was laying on the bed, and what I would say is I fell asleep, but that's unknowable actually what happened. I was laying on the bed and I'm just going to say I fell asleep just to make it something that I can talk about. So I fell asleep and it was lights out. It wasn't I was conscious of falling asleep, there was nothing. There was not even something or awareness or anything or consciousness. There was just absolutely nothing, like I was asleep. But then I woke up. But I didn't wake up, the character. The character didn't wake up, or the personality structure didn't wake up, or the world didn't wake up. There suddenly was awakeness, and there was nothing as well. There wasn't anything that the awakeness could be aware of. Other teachers might call what I'm describing as awakeness consciousness. So there was consciousness, and there was nothing. And this consciousness was so complete, it didn't have any sense of being incomplete. It just was awake. And there was nothing in it. It couldn't be bored. It couldn't know who it was. So it couldn't be like, oh, I'm Lisa lying in a bed. and this is an awakening experience. It just was awake. There was no thinking that happened. There was no body that was there. There was no objects. There was no room. There was nothing, just awakeness. And it was so free. It could have been awake for billions and billions of years, and there was nothing that it needed. It didn't lack anything. So it didn't have any sense of like, oh man, I've been laying here awake for like 2 hours. When is this going to end? This is boring. There was no sense of being complete or incomplete. There were no opposites. There was just awakeness. And then, eventually, after what could have been trillions and trillions and trillions of lifetimes or years, it is unknown. Time is unknown. There was no objects to know the movement of time. There was nothing except awakeness. And then eventually, a thought popped in and said, this is what they talk about. And then another thought popped in and said, but who is it that they're talking to? Because there wasn't a Lisa there, so I didn't know who I was. I didn't think, oh, I'm Lisa laying here having an awakening experience. It was just awakeness. And then the thought popped in, and then the next thought was, but who is this thought talking to? Like, who is it? Who am I? And then what happened was all the senses began to come back into the world. So then what happened was thinking began to appear, and like a domino effect, there was thoughts about Lisa and thoughts about her life. So that wasn't there before. I had no idea about Lisa. And then Lisa began to appear, and the images of Lisa, her past, her future, her body image, all of them ideas, belief systems. And then hearing began to appear, like beep, beep, from the rickshaws. And then sounds of people on the street. But there was still no idea about a street or hearing or anything like that. And then feeling on the body began to appear. And then the body began to appear. And the image of the body began to appear. And then emotions began to appear. And then finally the room began to appear. And then there was a room, and then there was Lisa in a room. And that was really profound. I still suffered after that. Like, there was still suffering that appeared after that. But after that moment, I always knew exactly who I was. I knew that nothingness in everything. Everywhere I went, everywhere I looked, beyond the character, there was a knowing that this life was made by consciousness, but not by the character. That the consciousness was first. Consciousness was prior to all my senses. Consciousness was there prior to the body being born and will be there after. And it was always known, it was seen. And I can't tell you how it's because you can't see nothingness, but yet it's known beyond thoughts, beyond your feelings, that all of this is awakeness. That all of this, threes, all of it is that same awakeness. And that awakeness is timeless, spaceless, and it's non-divided. And it's a division of the mind which makes it feel like there is a Lisa inside the body and a world outside. It's not a reality. The reality is there's awakeness. And I know that might sound really confusing. When I first heard emptiness and awakeness and consciousness talked about, it was in the Heart Sutra, in Nonduality. This is what I have tattooed on my arm. And they used to make you chant it. I just have the like the mantra to it. I don't have the whole. I've thought about getting the whole thing done, but I don't know where to get it done. Maybe my stomach. Apparently you're not meant to have any religious things below the legs. So it has to be on this bit, but I don't know. That's what I've been told. So the Heart Sutra, I used to chant it, so they made you chant it every time you went to the Buddhist center, and they recommended that you chanted it every morning before your practice. So I learned it off by heart. I can't really remember it to chant it to you now, but I feel it. And there's this paragraph in it where it's like, it says, it's not eyes, it's not ears, it's just that awakening experience I described. So it's not eyes, it's not ears, so it's not hearing, it's not sight, it's not smell, it's not taste, it's not thinking, it's not feeling, it's not emotion. It's also, it says in the Heart Sutra, not consciousness. That's because it's it's consciousness. It says, and it even says very specifically, consciousness too is form. But that's something that we will break down. At the moment, I'm happy to call it consciousness because at least we have some sort of wording to talk about. And then eventually when there is a comfortableness with the word consciousness, you begin to break it down, and it's actually mystery. It's unknowable. It's absolutely unknowable, but yet here it is. And then it says in the Heart Sutra something like it's empty and full. Like this world is empty and full simultaneously. So form is emptiness and emptiness is form. And it says that also in non-duality you'll hear nothing and everything. Non-duality tend to like nothing being the source, but Buddhism doesn't distinguish emptiness as being the source. It says one comes with the other, like they are the same. Well, that's what it was in the Heart Sutra. Anyway, when I listened to the Heart Sutra, I think I first got introduced to it when I was 19, when I started university. And I had no idea what it was talking about. No idea. I think I thought I had some idea of what it was talking about. But really, when I listened to it, like my heart just like sung. Even though I didn't know what it was talking about, and there were lots of weird parts in it about bodhisattvas, and it depends on the translation as well. I just, like, my heart had that, like, beautiful vibration of love in it, and so I couldn't help but be attracted to it. You can't help but be attracted to what you love. You can't put it down when you love something. And yeah, I loved it. And I maybe was arrogant and thought I knew what it meant, or maybe I acknowledged that I had no idea what it meant. And that might be the same here. Like, you listen to me speaking, you're like, what is this woman on? This makes no sense at all. But just give it time. The most important part is how it makes you feel. But that's the most important part. Thinking comes and goes and does all types of things. Yeah. So nothing is, which is also everything, is the most important subject in spirituality. It's the most important thing in life. Nothing. It's everything. It's your experience now. So you might think that you're an object watching me. So you might think that you're a person sitting there listening to me. You might think that you were sitting in the cafe and that you walked upstairs and now you're listening to me, and then later you've got to do this and that, but you're not. I'm not talking to that person. That person isn't alive. That person is a figment of your imagination. Who I'm talking to now is the consciousness. That's the only part I could be talking to. The person that believes in this and likes this and doesn't like that isn't alive. I know that sounds really abstract to the thinking mind. Like, how can that person not be alive? But it's like you're watching a film of you, and there's something that's watching that, and that's who you are. And that is no thing. And that's why the person in the personal world finds it so hard to hear, because it's not something you can imagine. You can't split your mind off and imagine nothing and everything. You can imagine yourself. You can imagine what you like and don't like. You can imagine coming here. You can imagine your problems. You can imagine everything that is a thing. But you can't imagine nothing or everything. But yet, that's who's listening to me. That's who sees these colours. That's who's experiencing now. I remember another time, I think I was listening to Adyashanti as I was walking through the bush. And maybe I just got into the hot tub. I'm beginning to forget what happened. But I was outside, and then I was with the dogs, and then I got into the hot tub, and I'd had this awakening. And then I just had this Adyashanti was like saying, God, that's God looking out, that's God looking out. And then I just had that beautiful, profound moment where I realized that my most intimate sense of being was what everybody called God looking out. Like that, and that's what everybody has. So in Buddhism, if we put it into non-Christian language, if we put it into Buddhist language, we'd say that was Buddha nature looking out. Yeah. And I just remember that again, one of those moments where everything began to twinkle. Like there is this stillness and this silence that's looking out, and it's nothing to do with you. It's nothing to do with what you've done. It's nothing to do with your sins, with what you've done wrong or right. And sin is an important thing, actually. We've got to get back to sin. I will get back to that. There's a reason why they talk about it in Christianity. Like it comes up in all religions, sin. And predominantly it's because you're not guilty. Because the you that you believe yourself to be isn't who you are. And it also means nobody else is guilty. And it's really important, actually, this guilt thing. That's why in Christianity we can go to the priest. Actually, do you know, I was a really bad practicing Christian because my dad was brought up in Glasgow. And if you know anything about English and the Scottish and the Irish, there was a lot of conflict between the Catholic and the I always want to say prostitutes, Protestants. I always have to remind myself they're not prostitutes. When I was a child, because of my dyslexia, they'd be like, "What religion are you?" And I'd be like, prostitute. I'm a prostitute. But yeah, we're not prostitutes, we're Protestants, protesters, we're Protestants. You've got to remember protesters, my mum would say. Yes, I am a prostitute. So, yeah, there was a lot of conflicts. My dad was not into religion. He was not a fan. A lot of it, there's a lot of, very common in Scotland and Ireland that they have annoyance with religion. And so I wasn't brought up in religion, so if I get it wrong. But I think that you can go to the priest and then you go in and you tell him everything you've done wrong, and then he says, it's okay, you're forgiven. And that's such a relief for people. Like, you can go in there, you can do something really bad. This isn't an excuse for doing something really bad, but if you do something really bad, like you run over the neighbour's cat, and that's terrible, you feel awful that you've run over this poor cat, and then you can go to the priest and then he tells you it's okay. And I think that this happens in all religions because I think all religions are about non-duality, and the biggest suffering of humans is this belief that you are separate, that you do, and that you are guilty or the other is guilty. And this is a huge mental suffering that happens for humans. And that's why I think religions always have this thing of how to deal with sin. There's a lot more complicated reasons to it. It's also in Christianity, and excuse me again, I'm talking to Christians and I don't know anything about Christianity, but another thing that I think they have in Christianity is they talk about the primordial sin. And I suppose that's most probably identification, like when you separate from the world, you're guilty, you feel guilty, like every human is born with sin. As soon as you separate, you feel guilty, that you've done something wrong, because you lost God, you lost yourself. And I feel that always feels like you've done something wrong, unless you're the other type of person that thinks the other did it wrong, which normally most of us oscillate between the two. It's like, I did it wrong, they did it wrong, I did it wrong. It's kind of the same thing, me and you. Just thinking if I have anything more to say about nothing before I open up to questions. This is freedom, but it's not freedom for you. Because who are you? I know that that must sound very frustrating going to many teachers that say this, but who are you? Who listens to me now? Who looks at me? Your mind says, I am sitting here looking. But if you really notice, and it's not really you doing it, there has always been this consciousness, this awakeness that knows prior to you knowing. So you're sitting here and you instantly know the colours on my shawl, the bed that I sit on, the brown bamboo behind me, the space, the distance. Instantly it is known. But it is known without any thoughts or any ideas. It just is known without any time or distance. Instantly it's known. And then your mind thinks about what I say. Your Your mind divides it and thinks about it and has ideas about it, but there's this instantaneous knowing that never leaves. And you can do whatever you like. You can't get rid of consciousness. Your mind says, I can kill the body and I'll get rid of consciousness, but you can try it. I'm sure you won't get rid of consciousness. Your mind says, I can take drugs and I get rid of consciousness, but there's still awakeness. What you get rid of in drugs is your memory. Or with alcohol is memory. You don't remember it, but there is still this radical awakeness happening. And that's who you are. You take it everywhere. It's your source, it's connection to source. There is no splitting off from it. But you're in this divided reality where you're subject to object. You're someone sitting, listening to Lisa. You are not sitting here. There is nobody sat in this room. Who is sat in this room? Who? The only thing you'll ever find is a thought, an idea, a belief system. Even a feeling doesn't mean you're sitting in the room, because the feeling's interpreted. So if you think, I've got a feeling and the feeling feels like it ends here, how do you know that? You know that in thought. Your actual instant experience is that there's everything. But we can open it up to questions now, because I'm sure this subject's very confusing. So if you feel confused about it, I can talk about it. I'm also very happy to work on personal dynamics as well, which is a different subject. That's working back in the dream. But sometimes you need to work in the dream to help relieve the character before you can explore the non-duality side. And sometimes it goes from one to the other. It's like there's a strong hearing of non-duality, and then you need to work on the character, and then the non-duality, and then the character. So sometimes it goes between the two.